Hi everyone and welcome to the Byolete podcast, the podcast where we discuss the science behind the brand. We're coming to you in a different place this week, so anyone who's watching this on video format will know that we're not sitting in the usual spot that we usually record the podcast in, and that's because we've had a really long drawn out heat wave in the UK, haven't we? So temperatures have been above 30 degrees for the last couple of days. And the UK, anyone who lives here will know, it's absolutely not built for extreme.
We're not set up for anything really.
Yeah.
If it's too cold or snows, we close down. If it's too hot, we can't do anything. But in the heat, our homes are just not built for that.
You were telling me something to do with the insulation in this country where there's like a regulation where it has to be so thick.
Going up and up, obviously, because generally it's a cold country. Yeah. But anyway, it's not helping us today. So we've come to the kitchen.
Yeah, which is a bit cooler than the room that we usually film in. So we're going to record this and then we're actually going to do a workout outside, so we are going to make the most of it. If anyone doesn't already follow us on our Instagram page, then head over to it. So it's just at Byolete on Instagram, and we post, our workouts on there, what we eat, and also what we're doing with the business. So if anyone's interested, then, head over to Instagram. But today, for the podcast, we're going to be discussing LDL cholesterol. So I think we have discussed this we've obviously been discussing it for a long time since we started the podcast, because obviously it's a very important biomarker for heart health and longevity in general. But it's obviously one of the biomarkers that we're offering as part of the lipid panel with Byolete. So we're just going to go a little bit into how accurate it is, should we still be using LDL cholesterol, and then a little bit about what it is.
Yeah. So I sprung this on us last minute because I've spoken to, I think you have as well, in the last week, a lot of patients, and then they keep coming up with the terminology of bad cholesterol.
Yeah.
And the amount of times we say there is no such thing as bad cholesterol, but then when we've looked through all the consultations done by other professionals, there's always reference to good and bad. And I think it builds up the wrong image, and then it sets about the wrong management plan.
Of course, yeah. So just to go back onto that point, this week I had a patient who had said to me, so he had dyslipidemia, so his lipids were just not in range. I can't remember exactly what the results were, but his LDL cholesterol, which is the bad cholesterol in quotation marks, was raised, but his HDL, which is good cholesterol again in quotation marks, was quite high. And so he'd been given the information that he did have high bad cholesterol, but his good cholesterol was high, so that he didn't need to worry about it. And so, yeah, like you say, if you are thinking about it in terms of good and bad, which we shouldn't be, you can get misinformed or misguided or maybe misinterpreted that as long as my good cholesterol is high and it's combating the bad, for instance. And that's exactly what this patient thought. And so his risk of having a heart attack or a stroke was high. We should not be using HDL or even LDL in isolation anyway. But, he was sort of walking around with a high Q risk, a risk of a heart attack or a stroke, thinking that he was okay because his good cholesterol was outweighing the bad. So I think, yeah, like you say, it is important that we get away from these terms.
And why is it bad cholesterol?
So so it's historically been known as bad cholesterol because LDL cholesterol is usually the vesicle that carries cholesterol away from the liver to the arteries. Obviously, if cholesterol in these vesicles is going to the arteries, it can get stuck within the artery wall, and then that's when we get the process which then leads to atherosclerosis, which is a plaque buildup, which can then rupture and then lead to a heart attack or a stroke. And so that's why it is known as that. However, there are other atherogenic particles that are not contained within an LDL particle, so it doesn't give us the whole picture. I think we also, like we've touched on before, we also don't really know how our bodies are transporting that cholesterol. So even though the predominant way that LDL cholesterol is working, it's being taken to the arteries, in some people it might not ever get deposited there.
Yeah.
So
I say that to a lot of patients. I had a couple this week and they said, oh, my cholesterol's high, X, Y, and Z. And I said, it doesn't really matter what this number means. It's what is happening in terms of transportation of cholesterol.
Yeah.
Cholesterol is the same molecule no matter where you find it. LDL stands for low density lipoprotein. HDL, high density lipoprotein. It's, like you said, the vessel that takes the cholesterol around the body. Cholesterol is, I actually don't know off the top of my head, but it's like a 26-30 carbon molecule, which is the same no matter where you find it within the body. Yes, you can modify it by adding chains onto it, which change the properties of it. But in general, it's the same thing. And the reason we come up with this podcast is to debunk the idea that it's bad.
Yeah.
Because without cholesterol, we will die. Basically, every cell in the body needs it. Every cell, as far as I know, has the ability to make cholesterol. It's just that the liver outputs more, and then that's why we need to transport it in certain ways. But the reason why we brought this podcast up was, historically in the UK, we've used LDL as the primary marker for heart disease. So we say, oh, this is high, you've got a good chance of having heart disease, heart attack, stroke within the next 5-10 years. But like you said before, it doesn't encompass all the particles or molecules that take cholesterol from the liver out to the arteries. So we have low density lipoprotein, we've got very low density lipoprotein, we've got intermediate density lipoprotein. So they're the other molecules that are not accounted for within an LDL blood test.
Yeah. So how we get around that is that we do have now a biomarker that we again will offer on Byolete, which is called non-HDL. And so that does encompass all of those things.
It does.
So it's possibly a better marker. I know that now the lipid guidelines, especially in the UK, are moving towards sort of looking at that as a biomarker rather than an LDL. We do still use LDL on them lipid management pathways, but I think especially for secondary prevention, I'm pretty sure the marker that we will be looking at and we want a reduction in to be below a certain level if someone is on treatment for dyslipidemias would be your non-HDL cholesterol. However, I don't know whether you've read this, but I read that in order to work out, this is just LDL specifically, there are 8 different calculations in order to work out what the concentration of it is or what the particle number is. So if there are 8 different ways to work it out, it means that there are 8 different answers. And so how accurate each one is, we don't know. And like you say, it's actually not, whenever we take it as a blood marker, it's sort of isn't it a ratio? So you're not actually testing the LDL cholesterol, which is quite difficult for even me to get my head around. But so you're never actually measuring it. And like you say, that's just the amount of LDL particles or the LDL concentration that is in your blood at that point. We don't know where it's going. We don't know how it's being transported. So there are a lot of nuances to it. And I think maybe in the health space, especially, I can speak for ourselves that we didn't realise this until we've been looking at it ourselves. And so as with anything, you need to look at the whole picture of somebody before you can say and use LDL cholesterol, for instance, in isolation.
Yeah. So I didn't know that it wasn't measured directly, but you get a blood test, you can look for certain things, but for LDL cholesterol, we use it as a ratio to triglycerides. So then if they're high or low, the ratio, it's 5. So you divide triglycerides by 5, top of my head.
Yeah.
So depending on that number, you can get a different output of this number. And the point is, why I don't like using LDL cholesterol is that it only gives you a concentration. There's so many different flaws with it, but concentration. So it's like, I'm going to try and make up an analogy on the spot, but if that was the LDL cholesterol within your blood, it's just telling you that's the volume.
Yeah.
But we're after how many bottles this volume's contained within. Because if you measure a heart attack as the ability to spill this bottle, I've got more chance of spilling water from a bottle if there's 10 bottles as opposed to 1 bottle.
Yeah.
And that's the whole point of it.
That's a good analogy.
So that's why we're moving towards particle number and then ApoB, which hopefully will come in the next few years within practice. Guidelines have changed. But I just want people to not be so fixated on LDL cholesterol because it doesn't give you that much. Like you said, it tells you your concentration in your blood, in that particular blood sample at that one moment in time. It doesn't tell you how it's being deposited, how it's being removed from the blood. Is it being used in other things and processes? It doesn't tell you much. And then all the other methods that we've got around that, again, it's all about theoretical risk. So if you look at doing a calcium score, which is a CT scan to see whether you've got any build-up, you won't see anything on that until you've got advanced disease. So from having nothing to advanced disease, it doesn't really give you that much of an insight. And that's the thing with all these blood tests is you have to take it with a pinch of salt.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I wanted to just say, obviously, because we're offering this as a panel, so if we don't believe in it or if we don't think we should be using it as much, why are we offering it? And I think it is because still it is the gold standard way to measure sort of your risk of
It's another string to the bow, and
yeah.
there's no way to neglect it. You have to include it.
Yeah, most studies that you will read will be based on these concentrations, because that's, like, again, you know, what we've used historically. I think over the next 10, 15 years, we will start to see that ApoB is probably creeping up, and maybe studies will use that as a biomarker rather than LDL, but it is important that we do still offer it. And I think, like you say, it's a starting point. And so, you know, if somebody's never had any of the blood markers checked, at least you can start with that and we can gain an idea. And obviously we have the knowledge now that we're never going to use that in isolation and be like, oh, well, you know, your LDL cholesterol was XYZ, you're at a massive increased risk. No, we need to then delve deeper into, well, what's your ApoB? What about your LPA levels? What are your triglycerides? You know, what's your HbA1c? And so it is building that full picture, but it is a good starting point, and that is why we do still offer it as a biomarker at Byolete.
Yeah, and the reason why we're doing testing in the first place is it is still the biggest killer globally. I think it's gone up to 20 million a year amongst men and women. It could, I think, theoretically go down to 9th or 10th in the league position for deaths. It's highly preventable. Like, in terms of cancers, that's second, isn't it? From memory, I think 12 million. That is not as preventable because we don't really know the process towards cancer progression and certain modes of it, whereas cardiovascular disease is pretty, I don't know, distinct. We actually know quite a lot about the processes.
Yeah.
So
and we know how to prevent it, or the best ways to prevent it, and we have biomarkers to physically check it to see, you know, what is your risk.
And everything's a lottery. Why do you take out insurance on a car? Why do you wear a seatbelt? It doesn't mean you're not going to have a crash, but at least you have an insurance policy in place. But yeah, I think the main things to take away from this is that there's no such thing as bad cholesterol.
Yeah.
Don't use any of these results in isolation. If you get a result from a clinician, or you are a clinician doing results, do not use these and interpret them to assess someone's management strategy in its own right. You need to include it with basically a big panel of bloods, ideally, because cardiovascular disease is a multimodal disease. It's not just one aspect. It could be poor VO2 max, it could be sedentary, obesity, diabetes. It's all these things that we're now starting to treat patients as we should, because we used to go at it from a single approach, didn't we, really? That's the biggest error in the past. And we just give one thing, and then if it didn't work, we'd try something else, and then we'd run out of ideas quite quickly, as opposed to treating it all holistically and going at that point.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, yeah, I think that's good, and I don't really have anything else to say. I think we've covered
as much as we can before we absolutely burn.
It's so
warm. Is roasting. I did have the door open behind us, but the wind kept on coming in, and there's quite a lot of wildlife outside.
But as always, thank you for watching / listening to this podcast. If you haven't already, then please subscribe to whatever platform you are listening or watching on, because it really does help us. And as always as well, if you have any questions that you'd like us to answer, or any podcasts that you would be interested in us doing, then please just send us a message and let us know. And we'll catch you at the next one.